Hello family, it's African Esquire. I'm here with a new video. This week we heard a horrible story of another horrible story, honestly, because we hear this all the time of black men, black people being killed by the police. But this week it seems as though the system has taken a new low, although we know that this is just another cycle, another stage in this cycle of racial oppression in the United States. This week, we hear a story about a young brother who was only 26 years old, and his name was Botham Jean, who was in his home, in his apartment, not doing anything wrong, just going about his day, when an officer mistakenly enters his apartment thinking that it's her apartment. This is what the story is said. And makes the mistake of thinking that it's her apartment, opens fire on this young brother, killing him. And this is not the first time that we've been here. It's not the first time that we've been inside of the situation where we are looking at unjust situations where black men are targeted by the police. But this one, it kind of hits home because for a lot of people, they come up with these algorithms. Okay, well, what if I was in my just doing what I was supposed to do? I answered the police. I was respectful to the police. I didn't say anything back to them. I was just driving. I drove under the speed limit. What if I'm following directions? What if I'm just taking my kid to school? What if I'm just living my life and being a orderly citizen as what we're told we're supposed to be, being a law-abiding citizen? I'm not doing anything to break laws. I'm not doing anything to even have interactions with the police. If I do all those things right, then will you not kill us? Then will you leave me alone? Then will you let me live my life and be happy and just function inside of this society and try to flourish? And the answer is no, because you could literally be in your own home. You could be at home in your own apartment. You can be in your own room doing nothing but watching your own television, and this type of thing could still happen. And what we see is that the warrant being issued in this case is taking a while, and that brings the question: are they even going to bring charges against this officer? And we all know what happens when they do bring charges. The charges is just one step, but a lot of times bringing charges against an officer does not necessarily mean that that person is going to be convicted. And that's really what has happened over and over again. The reason I want to frame this situation as something that has been happening is because this is six years after Trayvon Martin. This is 6 years since that young boy was taken from his parents, taken from his community, just simply walking home from the store, trying to get home to his father. And since then, we have had incident after incident, time after time, where we are in the same situation. We've had Mike Brown, we've had Philando Castile, we've had Alton Sterling, we've had so many, to the point where I can't even think about all the people that have been killed by the police, all of these sensationalized stories that has happened since the time of Trayvon Martin. And what we can see and clearly analyze is that it's not getting better. If anything, the resistance is getting worse. Black Lives Matter is not as organized as they were at one time. The response is not clear. What do we do in these situations? What do we do whenever we do get a verdict of not guilty from someone who has violently murdered a black person? What do we do whenever we have a Rekia Boyd, a Sandra Bland, a Mike Brown? What do we do when those situations happen and we don't get the right response? We don't get the right conviction. And the answer has not been figured out by the people who say that they have the answers. Black Lives Matter has not proposed a real concrete answer as to what to do, nor has the NAACP, nor has the Urban League, nor has any type of organization actually come to a solution to this problem. And what it seems that will keep happening is that black people will keep dying, being murdered by the police, and really it's just a cycle. And it's a matter of when we will get tired of protesting. It's a matter of when we will get tired of saying things, when we will get tired of going on social media and saying rest in peace, when we will get tired. And I already see people getting tired. I noticed that when these things happen, we're not as reactionary, we're not as hurt. And while reactionary is not necessarily revolutionary, it is good to be reactionary to a degree, because if you're reacting, that means that you're still conscious. That means that you still feel the pain. That means that you still have the ability to empathize with yourself, empathize with your community, and understand that you are being victimized. But if you're not reacting the same, if you're not as outraged, if you're not having some type of anger come out of this, then that leads to the concern of, are we even woke anymore? Or are we becoming unconscious to this? Because we've seen it happen so many times where black men, black women have been killed by the police, and no one has been brought to answer for the murders of these people. And because we've seen it so many times play out, we've seen videos of these deaths, we've seen horrifying images of our people being killed, and because we've seen it so many times, we've seen the same results so many times, we've become numb to it. We've become to the point where we don't have a real good reaction. We don't really know what to do about it. We don't know what to say about it. And that's something to be concerned. That's something that's very concerning if we are getting to that point where we don't have anything to say and we don't have any recourse. So I'm bringing all this up to say that I think that what we have to do is go back to the drawing board, especially people who consider themselves activists in whatever organization that you're in, and really think about what the end goal is here. The question that I have to ask, when we go way back to the old discourse between people like Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois, is this idea that our goal should be appealing to the system to do better by us. Is this a realistic course of action? Is this something that's actually going to work? And so far it hasn't worked. And we're told this, this fallacy that everything with time gets better. With time, things will improve. With time, progress is happening. We've come so far already, and therefore there just needs to be more time that passes. The racists need to die off. That's what needs to happen. This is not something that is a good enough answer for me, and it should certainly not be a good enough answer for you. The idea that with time things passes, this is not something that is necessarily true. As Dr. Amos Wilson said, this is not the idea that things get better with time. That is not a universal law. That is not a sure thing. It's that things are always going to get better. This is something that we've been told, but realistically, if we look at the progression of issues as far as racism, as far as the treatment of black people, we can see that things have gone in cycles. There's been times where people were not necessarily doing as harsh things or openly doing as harsh of things to African people in America, but there's been times where they certainly would go back to doing those things. And the classic example is following slavery, what you had was a period of Reconstruction in the 1860s and the 1870s. That was a time where white America was trying to make, certain parts of white America was trying to make amends with the whole situation of slavery, and because of that, they started putting means of reparations for black people into action. They started building institutions for black people. They started building schools. They're building, allowing black people to be politicians, allowing them to actually have part in public office. And what happened eventually is, after all of this was done, people felt like, oh, there's progress. Oh, African people, we're going somewhere. Oh, we're doing better. But guess what? An administration changed. And with an administration change, with a new president, all of those things that were done, all of those changes, all of those reforms were done. They were gone. And then now we are back into the same place where we are now. So then you see the same thing happen with Barack Obama. If you remember when he was elected, he wasn't just the only black person elected. There was a lot of black leaders who were in political positions, but not just that. He had a majority in the House and the Senate, and the Democrats like to pretend that they care about the well-being of black people, so black people were into it. They were saying, yes, America is finally going the right direction. We finally have a black leader. We finally have a black man in office who's going to do right by us. But guess what? There was an administration change, and almost everything that he's ever done, and it wasn't a lot of things he did for African people, let's be very clear, but the few things that has been done by him has been completely undone, which begs the question, is our issue voting? Because if we're voting people in that can do things, and not a lot of things, but they can do some things, but only an administration change will completely undo everything that person has done, then what are we trying to get from voting? We're trying to get temporary gains, temporary wins. If anything, we should be trying to get the type of thing, the type of progress, the only type of progress to me is the type of progress that will last even if an administration changes, even if there's a new president in power, something that can't be taken away. But of course, if you're trying to get something that can't be taken away, then you have to be trying to get something that can't be given to you. So the things that we should be trying to get are not things that we will depend on the white power structure to give to us, because at any time that someone can give to you, they can always take away from you. The question I would also pose to people is, has this whole dream that America will do right by people, is it really reasonable at this point? This idea that you can live peacefully, and even if you never have what happened to Brother Botham happen to you, the fact that it's in our conscience that even in our own homes, even in our own apartments, even in our own jobs, our own cars, whatever, we are not safe. Having that reality, even if this doesn't happen to you, that is the reality of the place where we are. That is the reality of the place where we're living. So having that in your mind, is it reasonable to really continue on with this notion that our ultimate saving grace for our children, our children's children, our children's children, is for us to just get some laws passed, for us to just try to integrate as much as possible into this society, especially when this society has always existed with a system of racial oppression to accompany it. And do we have to go back to the original questions that were happening? It was very prevalent back in slavery, back in Jim Crow, for people to be having conversations about, is it realistic to think that African people can ever have true peace in the United States? Or do we have to start talking about relocating to Africa, relocating to places where Black people have a majority and where we can safely make our own governance and actually build our own institutions? That was really all Marcus Garvey was teaching. That was all he was preaching, was that we need to make sure that we are building our own institutions. We need to make sure that we're building up our own countries. We're building up our own livelihood. These are the questions that we have to ask. Or is it realistic to think that our saving grace is fighting for something that could be easily taken away with an administration change? Can we ever feel safe knowing that there's a whole judicial system that has ever since our ancestors were enslaved in the United States, this judicial system has constantly maintained a system where if we step out of line, or even if we don't step out of line, if we are just living our everyday lives, they could possibly have an officer take our lives and then not even have to face any consequences for this. Is it realistic to think that this is our saving grace, to simply keep fighting for some type of equality in America? Or do we have to start thinking outside the box? Many of you know, all of you should know, I'm a Pan-Africanist, and Pan-Africanism, there's so many things loaded into that word, but the primary premise is that we cannot be free in America if Africa is not free. But not only that, I personally, while I do not think that, everyone has to go back to Africa, but me personally, I personally cannot feel safe, truly safe, in this system, knowing what has happened to my people, knowing what continues to happen to my people. I do not see myself ever feeling safe as an African person in America. And because of that, my ultimate goal is to go back to the place where my ancestors actually did come from. My ancestors actually did build. And while not every Pan-Africanist necessarily believes you have to go back to Africa, everyone should believe that regardless of if you go back to Africa or if you stay in America, that you are subject to a government without having anyone to fight for you. There's no African government right now that is not being controlled by the West. There's no African government right now that's not being controlled by the interest of the West. And if you're being controlled by the interest of the West, then you're clearly not going to be able to advocate for your own people, let alone your people who have been spread out through the diaspora. So these are the questions that we have to ask, and we have to make sure that we're the ones that are driving this dialogue and that we're not depending on the power structure to pick people who are going to drive the dialogue for us. And what I mean by that is, if you look at these people who are on these news corporations, these multi-million-dollar corporations, and we're told that these are people who are going to be activists and speak for us, a lot of them are scared to say these things. A lot of them are scared to actually bring up, when's the last time you heard someone talk about the Black to Africa movement? Like that was something that was insignificant in our history. When's the last time you heard that on MSNBC, on CNN? That they act like that was such a small part of our history. People forget that Marcus Garvey and the UNIA, that was the largest Black African movement in the United States ever. And not just was it the largest in the United States, Marcus Garvey as an individual has influenced the revolutions all over the continent of Africa that were happening in the 60s and in the 70s. So this was a huge person, but for some reason, we never talk about this as a possible solution. We're only talking about things like stand your ground or reparations or just Black Lives Matter. We're talking about things in a very small confound. We're not being able to have dialogue about what is it that we are missing. What can we learn from history? Even if you don't want to agree with history, let's figure out what. Even if you don't want to agree with someone like a Marcus Garvey, let's figure out what we could have missed from him. What is it that we could have carried with us to today? And we're not having those conversations in those spaces because it's very intentional that they pick people to be in those corporations and they pick people to be in these companies who are going to say, even when they are supposedly being controversial, they're only going to say what they want them to say. Because of that, we have to make sure that we're using alternative means of communication, social media, YouTube, Black Junction TV, alternative means of social media in order to have these conversations and to actually think for ourselves and to actually figure out what is it that's realistic for ourselves, what type of future is there in us in this country for us, and if there is a future, then how do we be protected for ourselves? How do we protect our children and our grandchildren from sustaining these types of things that Brother Botham did go through? So that is all I have in this particular video, and I will see you on another video. So please leave a comment and subscribe, and I will see you on in the next video.